The AP Lang exam consists of two sections. Section 1 is your multiple choice section. Section 2 consists of 3 essay questions, and it's timed at 2 hours and 15 minutes. The exam recommends that you spend about 40 minutes writing each essay, the exception being the Q1 synthesis essay, which they've built in an additional 15 minutes to read all of the sources that go with it. But beyond that, you should spend about 40 minutes planning and writing the essay, 40 minutes planning and writing the Q2 rhetorical analysis, and 40 minutes planning and writing the Q3 free response essay. When you take the actual exam, you're just given a big block of time to write all 3 essays. So you can steal time from one essay and give it to another. And by the end of our year, you'll kind of have a good idea of which essays you're faster at, and you'll have a better approach to that. However, when we practice writing under a timer in class, we need to ultimately prepare to spend about 40 minutes writing each essay. And while we won't start off with a strict 40-minute timer, by the end of our year when we're doing our exam prep, all of our timers will be 40 minutes, with the exception being, again, that Q1 essay that gets an additional 15. So this raises the question, what exactly can you do with an essay in just 40 minutes? Well, clearly you can't do what you could do if you were given a couple of days. And that's okay, because on the essay questions, you got to keep in mind this is an exam. You are not meant to produce excellent, polished pieces of writing. You're meant to produce something that it resembles a rough draft that you ultimately could polish into something of quality. Remember, an exam, you're trying to just demonstrate what you can really do, not necessarily how polished that work can be. And so when we read your essays after the AP exam, we're looking for a lot of potential. What could this essay potentially be if a student had more time? And we're also just looking for rough draft quality, so keep that in mind. How do you go about preparing to write an essay in 40 minutes? Well, it's not anything you can really do just overnight. It takes a lot of practice. You're going to have to practice writing as many essays as possible to the point where you're so comfortable using the skills that they just become natural. And the second thing that I want you to keep in mind is you need to adjust your expectations to fit what it is possible to actually do in 40 minutes. Just like I said on the previous slide, you cannot produce an excellent work of art in just this little amount of time. You have to be okay with producing a good quality rough draft. We started off our year in our study of rhetorical analysis by writing an essay over the course of 72 hours. And so that, of course, is not going to look much like what a 40-minute version looks like. So what does a 40-minute version of a rhetorical analysis essay look like? Well, it looks like the first essay we wrote. It's just a condensed version of that. Whereas a lot of you are writing upwards of 1,500 words, this is going to be about 700 to 800 words because that's just the maximum that most people can write given the amount of time you have. To give you a better picture of what this looks like, here's kind of a breakdown, a sentence-by-sentence breakdown of what a 40-minute rhetorical analysis essay looks like. You want to start with a short 3-sentence intro. Your introduction should not be more than 125 words. If you start creeping over that, you're just taking too long to get the essay started. Follow your introduction with short 5 or 6 sentence body paragraphs. Each body paragraph should only be about 150 to 200 words each. Those body paragraphs are still going to go in the same, they're still going to follow the same basic structure. You're going to have your one topic sentence. This time you'll need to write 2 to 3 sentences of combined text evidence and explanations of the intended effects. 1 sentence dealing with rhetorical obstacle, 1 sentence concluding with why overcome the obstacle is necessary. Once you've finished your 3 body paragraphs, you'll need a short 3-sentence conclusion. This can be a little longer than the introduction because you've got to sum everything up. But again, it shouldn't be any longer than the rest of your body paragraphs at 150 to 200 words. The suggested pacing for a 40-minute rhetorical analysis essay should look something like this. You want to spend about a quarter of your time reading and planning, and then the other 3/4 composing the actual essay. Anytime you have left over at the end, you want to go back and make revisions. If you're typing, that's easy to do. If you're handwriting, you'll want to make those notes in the margin with little arrows and strike throughs and that sort of thing. So as a general rule of thumb, about a quarter of the time reading and planning, 3/4 of the time composing. Some keys to success on writing a timed rhetorical analysis. First of all, you want to be super precise in your thesis statement. Don't start writing your essay until you know exactly what your thesis is going to be and what your thesis will contain. You also want to be super precise in your topic statements. Make sure you know what those are going to entail before you start writing as well, because they give you guidance for each entire body paragraph. You also want to stay laser focused on supporting the ideas that you announce in your topic statements. Don't drift off into anything else that could cost you valuable time and not even contribute to your argument. Next, you want to pull only text evidence that directly supports your ideas. Don't pull text evidence just to have text evidence. You don't have time for that. Pull text evidence that directly supports what you say it supports. Also, want to explain your intended effects on the audience as you write your evidence. It's definitely a time-saving technique to kind of lace that together. Finally, be direct, write plainly, write literally, and use consistent terms. Remember, this is a rough draft, so it's okay to repeat the same term. In fact, if you want to keep your argument clear and logical, a lot of times you do need to repeat the same terms over and over again. You're going to see that in my example coming up. And lastly, it's okay to be formulaic. Okay, you're not creating art here, you're demonstrating a skill. So you're not going to be judged for writing in a very repeatable format throughout the whole essay. Because again, it's an assessment, not an opportunity to create something that's going to be remembered. So I've shared with you some sample body paragraphs for a rhetorical analysis essay, but I want to show you a version of one of those paragraphs that's condensed down for this limited timer. And this paragraph, I believe my original paragraphs all were up to 100 or 250 to 300 words. I think one of them was even over 300 words. But here is kind of a 187 word version of one of those paragraphs, starting with my topic sentence. After stirring her audience's pity and shame, Kelly makes a causal argument that morally obliges her audience to act. Super simple, started with my transition phrase, then my main clause just identifies the technique and briefly explains what it's designed to do to the audience. Next, get in my text evidence. She begins paragraph 9 with rhetorical questions, asking whether Georgia or New Jersey would have passed laws outlawing child labor if women were allowed to vote, implying that if her audience had suffrage, they could end abusive child labor practices across the country. Kelly's argument here is intended to help her audience view her fight to end child labor as dependent on their stated goals of suffrage. Notice how I've just followed up my first piece of text evidence immediately with a statement of explaining its intended effects. Now for another piece of text evidence, Kelly furthers her argument by next claiming that the audience is unable to, quote, free their consciences from participation in this great evil because they cannot yet vote, which is intended to add a moral imperative to the audience's cause for equality. So there I've kind of woven my text evidence and explanations together. By this point I'm ready to relate it to obstacle and purpose. So start with relating it to obstacle. Aligning the two causes and characterizing them as morally urgent are necessary to overcome any dissonance her audience might perceive between the subject of her speech and the convention's ostensible purpose. Kelly needs her audience to understand these moral obligations so that they will be willing to take on her call to action in the final paragraphs. Notice how I've kind of repeated the word moral over and over again. And that's because I want to make my meaning super clear, and I don't want to waste time looking for synonyms to the word moral. Also, there's not a whole lot of really great synonyms for moral that keep the exact same meaning that I'm talking about here. So this is a good example of just using consistent terms. It doesn't sound repetitive, it sounds clear. For your first timed essay, you'll be given 60 minutes. You're expected to write all 5 paragraphs, and just know up front, I don't expect this to be perfect, but I expect it to be complete. The assignment itself is a timed Canvas quiz. You want to type directly in that quiz. Remember, you're shooting for rough draft quality. No need for MLA formatting, but just make sure your work looks neat. It needs to resemble an essay by the time you're done. Finally, keep in mind that you will spend the next class day revising and editing the essay before submitting it for grading. So this timer is just practice. Do your best to finish, but we're working on a true rough draft here.